So here we have an appendix to that, a pictograph at Mount Sinai. Now, this not so brief appendix, sorry about that, is to further demonstrate that the format of my pictograph at Mount Sinai is contemporaneous with formats readily available at that time. Is to further demonstrate that this commandment representation was indeed a cohesive and a readily understood concept of that Bronze Age, was perfectly contextual, and was not a composite of random thoughts and authors at random and anachronistic times. It's to further demonstrate that our pictograph submitted above subscribes to the prevailing Hebrew format, a Proto-Hebrew format. For all those intransigent folks that are still stuck on this being an Arabic pictograph, stuck on this being a pictograph of another age altogether, with a radically different orthology. Yes, Proto-Hebrew, since our pictograph in question corresponds to the orthology and format of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. A format that was literally carried down through the centuries to these jar handles found at Abraham's Hebron. It corresponds to the syllabic L on the above relief, having a slightly evolved orthology in the time of the kings. An L that is definitely not Arabic, no matter how you twist it. No, the primitive L of our pictograph is completely unlike the much later Arabic definite article. So get over it already. But more so, this appendix is to further demonstrate that our commandment pictograph conforms to the format of other Middle to late Bronze Age figures, such as figures found in the Mesopotamian city of Ugarit, figures with horns, especially conforming to a stela found in Ugarit by Claude Schaefer back in 1932, as shown repeatedly in those previous videos. A large stele found not too far from that earlier region of Abraham, his wife, and his dad, at that earlier region of Haran. With our commandment pictograph very closely conforming to that bovine stela found a mere 20 meters from what is said to be the Temple of Baal, a foundational icon found among strata thought to be active somewhere between 1450 and 1750 BC. An icon now known as the Baal Stela. An important icon that was likely being exported to Egypt somewhere around that late Bronze Age period. Exported from that busy shipping port during their busy period. Exported and imported somewhere around the time of the Hebrew Exodus. Imported and enthusiastically adopted by that polytheistic Egyptian culture. And all the above information, which is readily available at Wikipedia following a simple search for Ugarit, Baal cycle, and Baal with thunderbolt. So no, I'm not making this up, folks. I am not going to belabor you with all those peer-reviewed references either. Instead, I'm going to dig deeper into those peer-proposed interpretations of that stela for you, starting with that puzzling thunderbolt reference of theirs. A reference that I also made to that L figure long before that wiki article. Before I saw that wiki article. Long before I saw that large stone stela of their Mesopotamian Baal god. Long before I saw that foundational stela, which is said to be the greatest discovery made in Ugarit. Yes, that thunderbolt was simply that obvious to me. And it should be to you as well. So, With all that stellar hyperbole in mind, we probably ought to consider our aforementioned pictograph be the greatest discovery made at Mount Sinai, since that commandment is foundational to Judaism, foundational to monotheism, a pictograph even greater than that earlier written birthing billboard, and even greater than that earlier written petroglyph panel at that mountain, and most certainly greater than that earlier written Mount Sinai panel. Greater since this just so happens to be our earliest pictograph of the greatest commandment ever. Can you do better than that? Can you? A commandment upon which all other commandments of El rest. So quite naturally, this is the greatest discovery of all times and places. Far greater than that Baal stela now featured at the Louvre in Paris. Still, I am rather surprised at that enlightening identification made by my fellow epigraphers. Quite amazed and delighted at their identification of that scepter being held by Baal as being a thunderbolt. Yes, a thunderbolt. Given that we have such a strong resemblance to that scepter being a wheat sheaf instead, and given that recent woke reference to Baal as being a beneficent vegetation god instead. A beneficent god, given that Baal always was the maleficent thunder god. Always was the fictional storm god, an impetuous and impulsive god, doing a great deal of damage with his winds and whatnot, even blowing out the windows of his much vaunted home with his tremendous thunder after being a bit of a recluse. With this dullish god not actually knowing the secret of the lightning, not actually knowing the precursor to that wild thunder of his, not knowing the benefactor of that thunderous gift, a gift that his father El allegedly gave to him. Whereas in my above pictograph of Mount Sinai, we see El as being the actual thunderbolt in that preposition position. We see El being pictured in the very same literary position, being pictured in that very same grammatical position at the very beginning of that phrase. Yes? In the beginning was God, so to speak, speaking his own preposition, since he is the very beginning, and nothing came before him, not even time. Here is that Baal stela, with that thunderbolt, lightning thunderbolt. Imagine that. And here's our El. Thunderbolt, El, thunderbolt, thunderbolt, El. Either way. Which is to say, in our highly polemical pictograph at Mount Sinai, we do not see Baal as holding that thunderbolt. No, we don't. We do not see that fat calf as holding that weapon of mass destruction. No, that thunderbolt is off in a world of its own. Is in a class of his own, unwilling to be held or held back by anyone at any time. Quite unlike that Baal figure of our stela, quite unlike our anthropomorphic Baal, like that cosplay figure with those upturned horns. And upturned hair. Cute. And uppity horn. Uppity unicorn horn, as you'll see here and there. A mere mortal with a not so modest kilt, we don't know, to go back to that, who happens to wield a club along with a fully loaded scabbard. wields it to subjugate that middle figure, to subjugate that downsized prophet, priest, and king, when that lightning bolt should have been more than sufficient for subjugation. No knives or clubs required. And once again, that is not a spear he is wielding, and no epigrapher worth their weight in words would suggest as much. That tassel would be counterproductive to any spear, would not improve its weight or trajectory in the least. But mostly, I'd like you to note the relative positioning of those three primary figures above. And yes, they are even facing the same way. Yes, note that. And note their elevations, the relative sizes, and their distinct platforms, what they are standing on. Topology. With Baal appearing to stand on water here. Yes, note the wavy lines. Wavy lines. We got water here. Yes. But actually he's standing on the bank. Those parallel lines immediately above those wavy lines, which is perfectly in keeping with Baal's continuous feud with the fluid god Yam, his continuous feud with the sea, or his feud with the seashore at the very least. His feuds at that land-sea interface, commonly described as Yam Suf in our Hebrew manuscripts. An interface, perspectively considered as Yam's surf, or at a land-sea interface conversely known as Baal's Zephon, perspectively considered as Baal's turf in this continuous feud with the sea, with Yam. So in short, what we have in our above commandment pictograph is a popular worship motif that is now being turned on its bovine head. Is now being turned on its exalted horn, as we read here, to be exact. Horn imagery, also seen in Daniel 7 and Revelation 13, if you're into that. So, not a foreign imagery by any means. A motive that is now being mocked, yes, now being mocked in pictographic form, in true pictographic form, since the new literary form wasn't all that widespread yet. Since some folks had to make bricks instead of go to school, and Hebrew school was not that cool. It was not for the common man. And as a result, this pictograph of ours was drawn in the common vernacular, immediately following this smashing event. A representation drawn just prior to that second set of commandments being presented. At which point, those folks would be a little more wary about making those graven images that we see in that pictograph. Okay, a whole lot more wary about making those graven images, since capital punishment might result. A glorious representation, glorifying the one who even controls the sea, who even controls the Yam, as El well demonstrated just a few months earlier. A sovereign control that the Lord duly demonstrated with that great sea divide. Demonstrated with that mysterious Yam Suf divide, when those Hebrews had come to their wits' end, had come to a memorable pie-shaped land's end, with the Egyptians hot on their tail. A great sea divide that was nominally known as the Yam Suf divide, with Safa, or Zephon, being the genitive form of that above nominative, genitively referring to the bank of that sea, as opposed to the sea bank. Not unlike that Sin and Mount Sinai distinction that I explained earlier. A great sea divide that was allegedly performed on something called the Red Sea, according to our ancient Greek translations, which could be spelled this way or that way. an enhanced descriptive, which may have been based on the gravel color or on the abundant pink color at the Gulf of Aqaba, which is a part of the Red Sea. Likewise, the Ooze Sea. Ooze Sea is the enhanced descriptive used by Sir Lancelot Brenton's 1984 translation of the Septuagint, presumably based on the texture or tide of some other sea. But again, a relatively loose descriptive. Yet, despite those earlier descriptives, our colorful academia, yes, starting with our skeptic Alan Gardner, is now translating that Suf as the Reed Sea, a far more novel translation upheld by numerous context-challenged readers, borrowing that loose descriptive from a verse that may have had reeds or ooze or flags or some sort of bull in it, depending on the context you are standing on and what sort of slime you are pitching. Here's a translation by one of our wonderful translations. And when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and she put the child in and laid it in the flags by the river's brink. Not a bad translation, maybe. And here's another one for you. Yeah, read that on your own. Enjoy. And here we have that bank, that Safa that we alluded to. And there we have, no, does not say Nile, believe it or not. It's a river, Nahor. So, Safa, bank. Suf, reeds. Maybe. Not likely. Okay, that screenshot was from, get that up. It's really good for you. Yet despite those ooey gooey feelings and all the latest tech, those less advanced readers really don't have a reed to stand on and don't have any flags to fly, since those reeds are not all that prevalent in a river, and even less so in a sea. Reeds that are elsewhere known as kana. Yes. Reed. Kana. So, contrary to those above novelties, the context of that verse above should probably be seen as that Hebrew safa above, rather than the suf of the above sophists. A suf that remains a mystery. A suf that could actually mean come to an end, according to Hebrew professors Bernard Botto and Dwayne Garrett, as in Land's End. A meaning that accords quite well with the context of that verse, being the bank, or even the very brink of that alleged river. A meaning that accords far better than some bulrushes or flags that might be near that riverbank. Flags that might be quite some distance upstream. No, that bullish interpretation should probably be sending some red flags to you. Should be sending some safety issues to you, or to Pharaoh's daughter at the least, who rescued that baby from the brink. After all, would you want to bathe there? Bathe in that squishy ooze? Or want to get caught in a tangle of reeds? A tangle of 15th century BC tampons, according to Wiki? Yeah, go to the link. When you have far better tubs to bathe in? Not bloody likely, huh? Sadly, it seems the reeds of those translations are a bit of a red herring, are fishy descriptives, adding a bit of color to our biblical commentary, adding a bit of greenery without the operative context, without the operative topology or the corresponding theology. They're a bit of a red herring, since those reads don't work all that well in any of our references to the sea, whereas our bank context definitely does. It works well in all of our references to the sea, which is to say that our saf was a solid extension of our suf. Our bank was a solid extension of our sea, a context you can actually stand on. And you can take that context of mine to the bank. Yes, you can take that textual criticism of mine to the bank, since reeds do not a proper sea make. Since reeds are typical of swamps and lagoons, vastly preferring the shallow, stagnant water. And even then, that native Nile river grass is not terribly salt tolerant, barely able to tolerate brackish water. So, what we have here is simple salt science, rendering that reeds sea hypothesis simply ridiculous. The hypothesis not worth its salt. So, calling those reeds a sea is awfully sloppy naming. A misnomer that the original text would certainly not have made. As you can see below, that reed sea hypothesis is just a field of dreams for readers who don't know reeds all that well, and is not a proper name that those Hebrews would have used, particularly with that damp-on nuance. There she is. Go there, you'll find the tampon reference for yourself. Sweet. There you go. Cypress papyrus. And it's a hostile hypothesis, which is little more than a straw man. Yes, there's the Hebrew for straw. Straw man argument, since those Hebrews were not nearly that stupid or illiterate. It's that they knew full well what a river was. They knew full well what a pond was, and what a field of reeds was. Here's an ancient text for you from Saqqara pyramids. Here you will find a field of reeds again. A field of reeds in the ancient text. Did they call it a sea of reeds? No, they're not that stupid. With those Hebrews being quite familiar with those fields of reeds above, quite familiar with those shallow swamps and the excavating of ponds, familiar with that water-retaining clay for the making of countless bricks. So, what we truly have in name and in actuality is a very great bank. A very great bank, illustrating that very great divide between God's chosen people and his non-chosen pagans. A great chasm, so to speak. An unfathomable chasm. Not unlike that chasm of Luke 16. With those reeds of modernity being totally irrelevant to the big picture. Totally irrelevant to the sea. Even if those reeds might have some historical origins. They might have been in some cute little pictogram drawn by the mother of Moses, a waterproof basket crafted so she could nurse him while she was working. And despite that pragmatic possibility, our pictograph of Mount Sinai is not nearly as cute as that baby in Egypt, and not nearly as cuddly as that Stella from Ugarit. But it's not all about cute and cuddly, it's all about context. And as we demonstrated in this lengthy appendix, our stick figure pictograph is perfectly contextual. Perfectly contextual and perfectly congruent to that foundational stela. A perfectly drawn imperative for a polytheistic people a perfectly drawn message after the fact. A message graciously drawn for his fellow Hebrews, sharing it with those who could neither read nor write, and sharing it with those who hadn't heard it spoken before those tablets were visibly broken. A commandment hence drawn in pictograph form, in a wonderfully clear and understandable form, in a fully accessible and palpable form for the deaf, dumb, and blind. A form that even this author could grasp it figuratively as well as physically. A message that this fiery Gentile, so many generations removed, was likewise compelled to share with you. Share with you, so that you too might be rescued. Rescued from yourself. Rescued from your propensity to put other gods before him, or to put other people before him. People such as parents, lovers, or children. A firebrand who was likewise rescued from the brink. Yes, rescued from his ungodly sin. And not by Pharaoh or Pharaoh's daughter, but rescued from the brink by Christ, that I might enjoy him forever. Cheers.